Postgres and not to the static configuration that might point into nowhere, right? So now this is, of course, this class is in the test class path. So I would like to run my application with those containers, and I can do this. I can have my Spring application from main augmented with this container config class, which we just looked, and I can run it. And I can also have my tests be augmented with this container configuration. So when I run my application test, it will run the test containers context. So here, for example, what I can do, I run the test. It does nothing, but it also does quite a bit because it checks that the application wires together. It will determine my environment where I run containers. It will, if necessary, pull and start the container images, and then it will configure my application to work with that setup. And this is perfect because as an application developer, I don't need to think about anything. Right? It's magnificent. So we started database, Kafka, and local stack, and we connected our application, and our application sort of worked with it, right? And this is within the test. So I can have my controller tests, for example, do actual requests to my application, right? And those will be high-level integration tests. I can trust them, right? Way more than I can trust my unit test to represent the actual functionality of application. So this is how you use test containers. And this is what it feels to use test containers. I can also show you that I can run my application there locally, and we can maybe inspect it slightly, right? Well, by inspect, I will just want to say that I want to show that we have the containers running at a certain point. So we can have, if we see here, we have a bunch of containers that some of them started just a second ago, right? And I'll need to clean up this list. But you can see that we have the database, we have local stack, and we have Kafka started just now. We're going to clean the others otherwise, right? And then I can use this application. This is just a Spring application. So if I go to my browser, and if I go to my local host 8080, it will tell me that my application is supposed to be available there. Come on. Why are we starting with my podcast? All. Stop it. Containers, go away.
Also, like on the chat, if you have like any question about test container, you can just put it in the chat.
Right, let me restart this very quickly. It just worked. I just ran this demo before.
But it's a demo effect. Don't worry.
No. But you can see the containers are being started, right? There are a ton of containers that are being started, and I don't need to do anything specific for this. I just run my test or my main Java class. So this is how I can run my setup locally and in CI, right? In CI, I also have access to my Docker environment, so I can run my application and my tests the same way, and it will run exactly the same setup as in my local environment, which is very good for integration tests, but also I can use the same or very similar setup for doing performance testing. And this is where Gatling comes in. So how would I go about adding some Gatling simulations and load tests to my application here?
So I will just share my screen. Yeah, so first, like, what is Gatling typically? So Gatling is a load testing tool. So it permits like to generate user and get a lot of information about your project. And typically is kind of also like Java code, because we have like SDK let me just do this, into like Java JavaScript, TypeScript, etc. And it's kind of the same thing at test container. Like all the load test, it's just written as code. So typically here, I'm just importing the library from Gatling. And also, like I will just show you that I have also the application ready. So I have like the API on 8080 localhost. So
This is the same application running, right?
yeah, it's the same application. So here I just like the base URL. So typically here is HTTP protocol. So typically the HTTP protocol is where your application is. So right now my application is on my localhost. The feeder typically, because when I want to test this application, I want to send like create project, for example, get the project, and instead of encoding this value into the code, so instead of doing like, I don't know, like here, of doing 111, I can use a feeder. So a feeder is just like CSV file or JSON file with a lot of information typically. So here I have like one project, I have like 1 million project on this CSV. And here, this filter, what it will do, it's for each user, it will take one line of the CSV. So the CSV will be random. So after that, typically I create like two scenarios. So the first one is to check when we add a project. So when we add a project, like for example, when we add like P8, the 8th project, P9, if we will see if the response time range is pretty good or not. And the second one is to find the project. And on this one, what we do is typically connecting on /API/project/code. And we check if the status is 200. So if we get the page and all the information. And here, so the JSON path is typically because this API, when you check a project, she return you a file, a JSON file with like availability, name of the project. And this permit to check also, like if inside your JSON file, the available key is equal to true, for example. And the thing with Gatling is you have multiple ways to generate users. So for example, user can become add-ons. So for example, you have 10 users directly into your website. It's the same thing as stress peak users. So typically, stress peak user when you pass on TV. So for example, I don't know, like you are Apple, you know that you just released the new iPhone. You know that you'll have like 1 million person coming into your website in like the first second, for example. And also what is important is with Gatling, you can make some assertion. So for example, you can say, okay, I want all my response time. So for all my requests, so for find a project and add a project, I want this request to take less than 50 seconds, for example, like 5 seconds. And the same thing for successful request. I want like 95% of my request, I want it to be successful. So now if I just want to run this test directly, so now we just need to use like Maven Gatling test. And here directly, like Gatling, we just like compile the simulation and run it. So you will see some log our criteria, which was like we wanted our application to take less than 5 seconds. We see that we like the request take more than 5 seconds for some of our requests. For example, we see that the max here. Here typically we see the maximum our simulation. And also we have another type of idea because okay, we can see like globally we have this response time range, but we can see also in details because in details we will see typically the same information but by request. So for example, we see that on find project we have this response time range, this number of requests by second, and you can also do this with other projects. So for now we don't have like any issue. The only issue is that the response time take a lot times that we had as requirements. But typically, so right now what we have done is typically launching Gatling on a local application, and now Oleg will just show you like how to typically containerize this application.
Right. So this was like what you showed was a very like normal local development sort of setup, right?
Yeah.
As a developer, you're working on your application, you have some non-functional requirements about the times, like SLA for how fast it needs to respond. You have your Gatling simulations ready, and you can just run your application, and you can point Gatling towards the URL where the application is,
Mm.
and then you get the what
So
do you
you
get?
so you get a small report directly into the terminal. So
Yeah.
you get some logs into the terminal. For example, when the test, like some of the test fails, the Gatling like return exit code, so -1 to say that you have an issue. And after Gatling gives you a report, like a HTML report with a lot of information directly. Like it's more easy to understand on the HTML report than
Yeah.
the terminal.
Excellent. So, but that run, like your Java application run as a Java application. And in
Yeah, yeah.
production, you are unlikely to do that. In production, you are probably running it in container. And it's also maybe for various purposes, it's not so convenient to run a Java application directly as a Java applications anywhere else beside the development environment. In my IDE, this is perfect because I can change things on the fly, right? And I can see them immediately reflected. But I would like to run my application for load test maybe a little bit more as the similar to production, right? So how do I Dockerize my application? This is very simple. There are a ton of recipes for how to Dockerize things. You, for example, can do different things. I took a very simple Docker file. Docker file is sort of your recipe for building the Docker image for this. So I just say, I would like a JDK, and I would like to put the Java file in my jar file in my container, in my image. And then I say that we're going to run this jar file as our application. This is not the most sophisticated Docker file ever. And it's not the one that, for example, I would recommend for production. So here's another example, which I generated using the Docker init utility. You can do Docker init, and it will ask you a bunch of questions about your project, and it will give you some recommendations about the Docker file. This is a little bit more heavy, so we are not going to use that for the demo, but it uses the multi-stage builds for the Docker file, right? So in a Docker file, you have the commands, how to build the image, but you can also have multiple things in there. Every command will create the additional layer, so you can execute and cache things. But what we do here for a typical Java application to be a like production level container, production level image, we can build the things and pull the dependencies. This is the first step, and we're going to put it in the image called dependencies. Then we use from that dependencies, we build on top of that, but in a different workflow, right? We can package the application, and this is where we're going to run our Maven package, right? This is what will create the jar files for you. And then in the end, what you can do, you can extract those because it's recommended to have the exploded deployments for specifically Spring Boot applications. So you don't need to do a lot of unpacking every time during the runtime. And then at the end, you can have your security things, or you can add users, or you can do anything with your image as in the configuration, right? So you can copy the final files, right? You can copy the extracted files for this project, and you say that as an entry point into this, we're going to run Java. So now to build this Docker file, you run the Docker build command. I can do that in my application here. Where's my simulation? Where's my simple Docker file? Because it's going to be just run a little bit faster. So if I have my terminal here, and I just do Docker build, I say what I want to build, or you can point to the particular Docker file. So I can say build here, and I tag the image with, I can do whatever, like my image and the tag. I will use latest, the one that is repeatable. And what will happen, Docker will get the context of this. So it will get the current directory where you can specify what exactly to run, and it will run the steps, right? That will create my image. So I have my Docker images, and it's right there at the top of that. My image latest built 16 seconds ago. Now I can do run, right? Docker run my image. And it will run my container. That will run my Spring Boot application, and it will, of course, fail because then my application needs context to run, right? It needs my database, it needs my Kafka, it needs my AWS. In production, those services are provisioned for me in the production environment. For my tests, I cannot do this, right? So what I can do is I can create the setup for it, right? Normally, you just can use Docker Compose for this. I think I can build this with test containers, right? Because I already have the code that does this for my Spring Boot application. So here's what I do. I created a very simple main class, right? Public static void main. You don't have to do this. You can rely on Docker Compose, but I wanted to show that this is also possible. And here I will create the whole environment for my application. I will say that I would like containers to work together on a network so they would see each other. I will run my Postgres. I will run my Kafka. I will run my local stack. And then I will run the generic container for my application, which is exactly what I showed you before. I will take the image from the Docker file. That is my Docker file. And I will also path my jar file as the context, right? So pre-built application. And I will configure my application to run with other containers. So in the previous example, we saw Spring Boot automatically use this integration with test containers to wire everything together, right? Here we do this manually. So I say for Spring Boot, for Bootstrap servers, sorry, I need to go and use Kafka 1992. The Kafka host is, of course, configured on my Kafka. When I say put it on the network, get the alias Kafka, right? It's all programmatic. I say where to find my database, and I also tell my application where to find my local stack, which is the kind of sort of the model for AWS services where the endpoints are. I expose everything. I can wait this. So now this is the configuration how to run my application in container, right? It will build the file if necessary. It will build the Docker image if necessary. So I can just run this main class in my CI or anything. And then I start my application dependencies. I create my S3 buckets. I don't need to do anything with the database because there I have database migrations, right? The application will take care of the database, but I run my migrations here, and then I start my application. We don't need this other stuff, but I think I can run this main class, right? Let's see what will do. What will it do? It does exactly sort of what we expect. It pulls the images if they are not present. It runs the images, and it runs my application generic container as well, right? So we transferred our jar file to the Docker daemon to build. We created the container for the image. We can also build not from the code itself, but externally. So you can build your Docker images separately and then use them as any image. You can push it into Docker Hub, or you can push it into your artifact repository internally. But the thing is, it runs. We start this application, and we can see that now, if I click this, well, the Spring Boot thinks that our Spring Boot application is up, and you can see that I have my containers there running, and one of them is also the Gatling demo application. If I tail the logs of that, you can see that this is my Spring application that we are trying to run. So now my application is containerized, right? My application is containerized. My application runs in container. And I also can run this locally if I wish, right? I can run it locally via running the Java class, or I can run it locally if I want as the in any, right? So here's my application is running, right? That was 80, right? Here's my little, much smaller Gatling simulation that I have here that uses just a few users, but it's sort of the same. It sends the packet, the request to API products. So if my URL is localhost 8080, where the application is available, right, I can do my Maven Gatling test, and it will run, and it will hit my containers there, right? Now my application is not running as a Java service. My application is running in the container. So when I get the report, I'm much closer. I'm much closer to the production-like environment. Would you believe now I can, and I can also run this in CI, right? And I can have my repeatable tests. Would you believe those performance results, Samir? Do you think we can believe those performance results?
Yeah, so even in CI, so like if you just open the report, you will have like the report for you Dockerized application, and also yeah, if you want, because like you don't really run this container uh, normally like in localhost, it's on the server, so it's on the CI/CD. You want, let me just share it. Uh, So for example, like I have an application, so I have so my Docker containers, I publish it on Docker Hub, for example. I just pull it into my servers. So I have my API typically. And so if I want to add, so now if I want to add this into my CI/CD, what I just need to do is like adding the new URL. I just change it. And now if I want to add it into my, into my CI/CD, I just need to say like Maven Gatling enterprise package. Again, also, so here we'll just first create a package. We also have a command to directly send this package to Gatling enterprise. But typically what this command does is on target, creating a jar file. Typically just this. Now, if I go directly on Gatling Enterprise Cloud, what I just need to do is going into package. I will just create a new one. I will name it Docker and Gatling. I will choose default theme. Now I just need to get my jar file. So now we see that the package is successfully created. And now I just need to create a simulation. So in simulation is kind of the scenario of your test. So for example, if you go to theaters or to a cinema, it will be the synopsis of the movie. And now I just need to select a package. So typically it will be the one I just create. So Docker and Gatling. I create my simulation. I choose simulation, Docker simulation. And now with Gatling Enterprise, I can create a multiple type of location. So it can be private. So on private, it will be like your server will use by Gatling to generate the user. Or it can be managed, and it's just Gatling will generate the user for you. So for example, I can choose like people from, I don't know, like Paris, but I can also select people coming from like North Virginia, for example. And the thing which is great also is I can say that I want, for example, if you know that your application is mostly used by French people, you can say that you want like 70% of people coming from France and the rest from the United States. And after I just need to save the simulation. I will not launch for now. But now if I just need to click here, copy the simulation ID. So now, so before this webinar, we created an action typically, and I will just show you the action. So typically it's just sorry, I will just zoom in. So it's just a really simple GitHub action. So it's just like we get a simulation ID from the user. It can be directly put hard coded directly on the GitHub action, but just for this demo, I ask for the simulation ID. And here, thanks to Gatling Enterprise action, it will run a simulation on Gatling Enterprise. So now I just need like to just run it. So now, we'll just refresh this. I just wait for a winner to take directly the job. And now, if I go directly on simulation, Docker simulation, I have one simulation already running. So for example, like you have the log here. For now, it's just like getting the load generator in order to generate users. Also, if you want, because right now we're just showing this on GitHub because it was like where the repository was hosted, but we have also integration like with GitLab, BuildKit, Jenkins also. So now I'm just waiting for the simulation to launching. And at the end, it will be kind of the same thing as Gatling open source. You will have like a report, like a full report, and with the same information. I'm just waiting for this to finish. Yeah, and right now, like for now to finish, it's just running on your CI, and you have all the log directly into your CI. For example, we see that right now it's building, deploying, and it's deployed. And also at the end, you will have like the log directly into your CI/CD, so you can easily say, I don't know, I have like you will have directly the return of the simulations directly into your CI. So just after you can add like some information or some other test. And now on Gatling Enterprise, so it's pretty easy because you have like two reports. So the first one is mostly for like a business side. It's mostly linked to business side or to have like all the information directly into like a small report. So typically you have the error ratio because we add some error typically on this simulation, and we see that the response time maximum, like typically the kind of maximum is like 273 milliseconds. And we also have like a wall report typically, which is kind of the same as Gatling open source, but with a lot more of precision, for example. And it's kind of also, we have the same thing for the assertion. We see that we failed on kind of all of our assertion. And if we check, for example, it's a good test. But right now, what we see here on Gatling Enterprise, so me, I'm like an engineer, I go to Gatling Enterprise, I just run my CI, I see that everything failed. And on my Gatling CI/CD, directly we send this information to the CI/CD. So for example, you see that all the assertion is wrong, it's failed. So we just send the CI/CD to fail directly. And this kind of problematics, for example, the error rate, also the response time range, can really differ between some configuration. Because a lot of time, the problem is just that, and it's kind of normal, but a lot of time it's kind of that you don't have the same, like the same servers, the same database, the same request to database between the production and test and the test environment. And in order to really have like good load testing numbers, you really need to have kind of the same environment between the production and the testing. So kind of the same server, the same CPU, RAM limit, for example. And I will just let like Oleg tell you about like how to limit CPU and RAM.
Yeah. There was a quick question there from Morta. How is the max concurrent VU calculated? But you can also answer it maybe in text there.
Yeah, I will answer it by text, and I will let you continue.
Okay, look. Right. So this is a very good question, right? We want our test setup to be kind of sort of resembling production environments. We want it for functional reasons to have the actual real services like databases and message brokers. We might want for performance tests and load tests have exactly containerized our application as well, because it might change how it runs, right? My workstation is very powerful. I don't run in production M1, M2 max. This is just ridiculous, right? So I would like the setup to be more consistent. And I will do that with the Docker container configuration, right? Because what I will do, I will limit the amount of resources that my container for the application is allowed to have, and I will run it the same way. This will allow me to have a consistent setup between different laptops and different workstations on the team. And it will also allow me to have the consistent results from CI, right? It is not perfect, right? And if you are doing the actual sort of hardcore micro benchmarking, then probably using a cloud resource, a cloud runner like the GitHub Action provides, is not the most stable environment, right? You will not get the microseconds correctly, and you will not probably be able to determine whether the JIT compiler, eliminates like a code or transforms into some other code to a certain extent, right? It's a volatile environment, but it doesn't mean that we cannot reduce something. So if we look here, right, this was my setup, how I run my containers. I was saying that I would like my application container. I'm sorry, are we showing the full screen, right? Okay, thank you. So my container there, right? Docker allows you to configure the resources that you want to give to your containers. You can do this with the Docker compose file limits, or you can do that with your command line flags, but you can also do this with test containers. And this is what I'm going to do exactly, because I like this being in code, right? On my application, what I would say, I would like to change the create container command. It will give me access from sort of the test containers API, which is a little bit idiomatic, and it tries to not give you the tools to sort of to write code that you will regret. Right? It tries to nudge you into the right direction. But also when you need some low-level details, you can absolutely get them. So here, what we are doing, we use the with create container command modifier. It's available under similar names with other languages as well. This is what we do. We get the host config, and we can limit the amount of resources. We can say that we're going to give this container one CPU, and we can tell how much memory we want to give this to this container. So this is with memory is, of course, the bytes, because that's how computers operate. So we're going to give it like 1,000 bytes, 1,000 kilobytes, right? So like this is amount of megabytes we have. And then we're going to say that we want 1,024 megabytes, which is 1 gigabyte, right? So here with this little snippet, we limit this container configuration to have one CPU and 1 gig of memory available. Now, whether my machine is more powerful or not, now this container, when I will run it, will run with the limits. So when I'm going to hit it with the load traffic, the results will be much more predictable. And especially if you're running, for example, in your CI environment, you're going to have a history of those results, right? You don't want the numbers there to be all over the place, because today is Tuesday and then tomorrow is Wednesday, right? You want the result to be trackable over a longer period of time, because that's how you can find the regressions, right?
Yeah, and also like I forgot to mention, but on Gatling Enterprise, on the home page of the simulation, you can see the trend of the performance test. So you can see that, I don't know, like for like if you run like multiple simulation, like if the performance testing is increasing, so you have a better application, or if you have like a worse application.
Yeah. And this is exactly because like nobody writes slow code on purpose, right? Like it's highly unlikely to find a developer who would be like, I wrote thread sleep into my application because like why not, right? You even though to show really good performance improvements, you need to start with a lousy baseline. So just saying, if you have the foresight that you will be asked to improve performance, no, don't. This is not a good advice. Never. No, don't write slow code. There is enough slow software in the world that we don't need on purpose slow software. However, we see the trends, right? We want to see the trends, and trends are very often even more important than just the like individual performance results, right? Because yeah, you can kind of sort of run the tests and see that you are still below SLA, and that's good, and you can release and nobody will come to you and say like, oh, my application is super slow, right? But like you want to see where you're moving. We are adding code, we're changing code, we want to see whether that makes applications slow or not, right? If you see that it is slowly creeping towards the numbers, then it's not good. For that we need repeatable environment. We achieve that with Docker and containers. So this is exactly how we run this. And well, you will not see the change here actually, right? Because it will still run my setup the same way, right? With this code. But I have a little different Java test that I can show you, which actually has the difference, right? I'm going to run this and I'm going to explain what this does. So this is the application of test containers to run JDK. We're going to run the 17 JDK version 17, and we're going to run the Java print flags final command here. We limit the amount of memory and limit the CPU to a host to one, CPU to 1, and memory to the memory limit parameter, which is either 1791 or 1792. What we will do, we will check the logs that they have. We print the flags, so it print the garbage collection selection, right? And you can see that in my case, if I have 1791 or less memory, I would expect Java to pick the serial GC. And if I have more, I would expect to see G1 GC. And then the test does exactly that. Starts, checks the logs, assert that the logs have the pattern. And here, just for humoring you, if I change the values there, you will see the test fail now, because at 1791, it picks the serial. So actually those limits are enforced, right? So like the Java application from within the container doesn't see my whole memory, but only configured limited memory. And that's it. So this is how I would do it. I would package my application in a container. I will create the repeatable environment by enforcing the resource limits. I would have my test containers programmatic configuration for my setup, and I would run that, and I would have my Gatling simulation run, and the results reported in the report files.
Yeah, you can run it if you want to. If you want to run it, you can run Gatling, and you will see that the number kind of changing because you limit the CPU and the memory available for your containers.
Yeah, actually, maybe I can run this, because before I run my simulation, right? I run this small simulation that I have. We will likely not see the differences, but I can show you that this at least checks out. While we are waiting for the containers here to start on my machine, you have a little voting thingy that you can do in the application for the thing.
It's kind of the demo effect. Like every time we do a demo.
Wait, I showed it you. No, it's fine. It's fine.
No, it's fun. It's just like the demo effect. But you can still ask your question on the chat, and we'll be.
Yeah. So the best practices would include a number of things, right? The standard environment, repeatable environment that you can run, repeatable environment between your CI and your local development environments, because that's where you're going to fix the issues.
Yeah. But also, like for example, if you use a database, it's kind of necessary to have like the same traffic between, like the traffic into a database between. We all know that on production you have like a high traffic into the database, but on test it's like, I don't know, like for example in test environment you have like 1 request per second, for example, on the database, and the production you have like 1 million requests by second. So it's kind of like having uh, like if you want to really test, you kind of need to have the same setup. So for example, you need like to maybe generate fake data. So you have a lot of library to generate fake data. You have library. You have also ChatGPT, Claude, which can like help you generate fake fake data, for example. But you really need to have kind of the same setup between the test environment and the production environment in order to have like really good result and to have like, because if you don't have the same environment, maybe on the test like everything will be good. Gatling will say, oh, everything is good, you don't have any problem. But maybe with on the production it will fail because you have like a lot of interaction. That's-
Yeah, I think it says the limit, but
and just to answer like Gerard, the thing with test container is can also offer me to uh, like when you do some tests. So for example, you can do some testing with test containers, and it can like directly generate the whole containers for you. So you can just use test container to generate the whole containers and doing some testing. They will generate the whole containers for you just by using Java code, and just after using like Gatling in order to launch your simulation. But I will let Oleg answer more your question.
yeah. So the thing is, you need some sort of a repeatable setup, right? So you don't need to, well, sort of, first of all, like you don't need to buy test containers, right? It's an open source library. I know that you meant it in a like figurative way, that you don't think this is the way to go. You can create the environments whichever way you want, right? You can have your staging environments with production like data and hit them with the simulation scripts, right? You can have your Docker Compose based setups and hit them with the simulation scripts. You can run the services in the VM directly and saying like, oh, my GitHub action installed my uh, database, install my Kafka, install my local stack, right? And hit it with the traffic, right? You can have any setup you want. I don't think using containers is that spectacular for micro benchmarking tests, right? As I said, you will have some volatility. You will have some volatility with the cloud runners anyhow, right? So it depends on the granularity of the data that you want to get back out of it. Uh, but it is a very reproducible setup that you can run in CI and locally, right? You can debug your application. I can run my application locally and run the simulation on top of that. I can have my debug, right? When my application runs in the container, I run it locally. I can attach the debugger to it. I can find the performance issues, right? Easy. And this is what test containers allows me to do, is to have very easy reproducible environment between my CI and local setup. Do you need to use that for all performance tests? Probably that's an overkill to say. But for very many use cases, for very many applications, I think it's a decent trade-off. Given that it's the best way to do the integration tests, you already have the half of the setup for that as well. So that is it. My application started.
Oh, but you can simulate if you want.
Yeah. Uh, Julian, how is resource usage compared to competitors? Novell is just whether it's heavy or not with CPU and or memory. Do you mean on the Gatling side or do you mean on the
Yeah.
test container side?
On the Gatling, it's kind of we optimize like a lot of this thing to avoid that using a lot of CPU and memory usage, for example. So we want and optimize already for CPU and memory. And after, if you want to say like, typically, for example, if you use the open source version of Gatling, the limit of RAM and CPU will typically be like your computers, because it will be your computer would load generate the users. But on Gatling Enterprise, so the SaaS, it will not link like it will you will not need to think about the CPU and memory if you're Gatling Enterprise, because it will come from Gatling. But on the Gatling open source, the limit is your computers. But yeah, we optimized, like the IT team optimized Gatling, yeah, to avoid using 1000 gigabyte of memory. So yeah, it's optimized.
I think nowadays it's all about GPUs. So you can use as much CPU and memory as you want. The important resource is GPUs. No, yeah. And while you're typing the response, just on the test container side, right? This is we just run containers in your Docker environment, so there is no overhead to running containers with test containers, right? It just runs the same containerized things.
But yeah, but if you like, for example, I don't know, like if you have a enterprise project, for example, you're like company, you want to do some performance testing, what you can do is first testing, like test this, doing a small proof of concept with Gatling open source. And when you really want like to simulate, I don't know, like it's just a number, but you want to simulate like 1 million, 2 million people, I think it's better for you to go to Gatling Enterprise, because you will not think about, oh, maybe my server will not like have the good configuration to generate the users. I need to maintain this server. So yeah, and I will let like Jira sending this answer about, I think, Testcontainers.
Yeah. Do we need to start my screen? Shall we, for the questions, switch the
Oh,
layout?
you can remove your screen if you want.
Okay. Right. No, I think the for the most enterprises, you need a simple you need a simple setup, right? As developers, we fight enough complexity as it is, right?
Yeah.
So for I would say 80% of the teams getting started with something where the setup is predictable, where they can figure it out of the box, where they can start measuring. I think this is the most
Yeah.
important. Uh,
But it's mostly like one reason that Gatling is doing like load testing as code is because like now developers can simply like a Java developer can simply use a SDK of Gatling without like learning a new language or
yeah,
learning a new way to do stuff. So yeah, it's mostly for simplicity.
yeah. And then you start measuring the metrics. You start looking at the important metrics, right? You stop losing performance with random pull requests, um, and then whether you actually put a lot of resources in optimizing your application, you don't have to, right?
Hmm.
Adding load tests doesn't mean that you have to immediately optimize your application. It's a very much could be a health metric for you, and then
But the thing with like load testing is, for example, we had like I had a live with Daniel War, which is like a one contributor of Nux.js, which is like a JavaScript framework. And the thing is, a lot of people thinking that the application is fast, like it's pretty fast. But for example, with Daniel War, we saw that this application sometimes take like 10 seconds to to load. So
yeah,
it's not like Oleg said, it's not because like it's better first to learn some simulation. So like giving like some load testing simulation to see first your pain point. So maybe it's one page will take like a long time to do. And after, like don't watch on it, but think about the code, why it take like 10 seconds and for example, and after like you can easily uh, improve your application.
yep.
Did you answer Gerard about the debugging or?
No. Well, Gerard is saying, like, I think Gerard just confirmed what we were talking about. So there were more questions about the private clouds, and there was also a question
So
about documentation.
for Luis, when you say like application hosted in private cloud, you said like, for example, you have like a private, like a air gap network, or it's most like you cannot, like for example, it's on only you compute. Sorry, when it's like only on your enterprise network, the application. Is that you want to say when you say private cloud or? Okay, yeah, you can say, because like for example on Gatling, it's really easy. You just need to ask the cloud, like the Gatling team, to enable you the fact that you can use private network here. You just need, like, the only thing you will need is just like typically configure the stuff for your application. But yeah, we can do it easily. And for the interpretation of let me just. So I don't have like typically directly the link, but you can directly be here if you want some documentation. Here's the documentation at Gatling. So you can easily like search for what you need. But also, like for example, what we have, I will just give you this page. Yeah, thanks, Gerard. And for Luis, you have also this page if you want to learn more about like how to test it in private. And just here, like if you have also more questions, you have my LinkedIn or like LinkedIn if you have more questions about after. So I will yeah, so yeah, the thing is, a virtual user is a trader.
All right. There are still people typing. Do we have more questions?
No, but it was kind of like, it was much easier to explain for them like this. It's kind of the same thing as like Gmail.
All right. I think we are past the hour, right? That was our plan. Was it our plan?
Yeah.
Please subscribe to the channel. No. If you have any other questions, follow us online. There are a number of links where you can find. If you have test containers questions, please join slack.testcontainers.com. The maintainers in the community are hanging out there. If you have questions about Gatling, what's the best way to follow up with those?
So if you want, like, if you have some question about Gatling, you can just join the forum, which is like community.gatling.io, and you can also like watch for other webinar we'll have on typically this link. Or you can just send me a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Just don't send. Well, send messages to Samir, but like don't overwhelm him with like random questions. There are only so many keystrokes we have in us. So explaining things in a public forum is much more beneficial. Right. Thank you very much, everyone who was watching.
Thank you. Any more like if you have any more question, you can just go on community.
Yeah. We need to stop this because like
Yeah.
nobody watches videos more than an hour. It's just the thing. So thank you very much. Have fun. Be mindful about your performance situations, and happy testing.